Hi, this is Steve Addison for the Movements Podcast, the podcast for people who want to multiply disciples and churches everywhere. Today we're going to talk to Jeff Timblin, or JT, about his journey in multiplying movements. He's a local church pastor in Long Beach, California.
Planted 20 years ago in Long Beach, California. And we were a missional church in a lot of ways and global. We're kind of known for that. My heart has always been nations. The heart of our leadership has been nations. And I believe a lot of our people in our church community were sharing the gospel with people, but we were never doing that as a church. And so, but we were heavy involved in different parts of the world. Specifically, Ethiopia is kind of the beginning of our movement story. And so we went down to southern Ethiopia where there were no identified churches in the villages, and we started using church planting principles. For about 10 years, we were doing that. And we saw multiplication happen, and we adapted our approach over the years in different ways. And we were doing 4 fields. We had no idea what that was. We had no idea what the terminology was, but we were learning what we knew and working really with leadership. And so one day, 3.5 years ago, I was in Ethiopia, and we pulled over to what would people call a rest stop to use the restroom, which means a bunch of trees on the side of the road. And I was actually waiting for our team. And I was walking under this very large, beautiful acacia tree. And I had a vision from the Lord, and it wasn't audible, but it was very clear. I always tell people, for me, an experience like that is more clear than an audible voice. I knew what God was telling me. What he said was really interesting. He said, I want you to go to Dallas, Texas. I want you to go to this specific conference. And I want you to take your minivan, and I want you to take these people with you. I'm like, that's very specific. So I wrote it down, and I prayed about it, and I asked the people that were on the trip. Some of them were on the trip, some of them weren't, that God told me to put in that minivan. So as soon as I got back, I asked everybody, and we signed up, and we drove the minivan to this conference in Texas that I had been at before. It was a missions conference. And we get there, and we actually got there late because I forgot about the time change. So we drove from California to Dallas, and it was 2 hours difference. So we got there right when the conference started. And we're sitting in one row, and the people on stage was a gentleman named Brian King, and he was interviewed by Troy Cooper. Mm-hmm. I had not met either one of these gentlemen before in my life. But what he was doing was hearing Brian's story. And Brian's story was my story exactly, but he was about a year ahead of me. So I'm listening very intently. He was a legacy pastor, a pastor involved in a typical church that loved Jesus, that was serving and preaching the word and cared about lostness, but he was disgruntled. There was something about his story that was like, there's something more, even though he was missional, and it was just my story. So I'm listening very intently, and Troy starts to interview him about his journey and movement and No Place Left. And I'm really listening. And he started talking about the Ephesians 4, apostles, prophets, evangelists, shepherds, and teachers. And it was at that moment, I believe, the Holy Spirit spoke to all 8 of us. And simultaneously, I looked to my right and I looked to my left. And what we were hearing from them was, you can do this here in America, what we've been really doing in other parts of the world. For some reason, it never dawned on us that we are a mission field, and we can go after church planting movement right in Long Beach, California. Mm. And so we said, we got to find that guy, Troy. So we hunted him down afterwards. It took us till about 10:30 that night to get a meeting with him. And he had Augie and Scuba, his whole team was there. And Jeff Sundell was there in the background, actually. And so there was about, all 8 of us came into this living room, and we said, we really believe God's called us to do this. And Troy vetted me right away, and I appreciated that. He says, there's 3 requirements. He said, the first requirement is you have to have a heart for lostness. I said, I really believe we have a heart for lost people. He says, okay. The second is you have to have a God-sized vision. I said, well, we'll get one, was my answer. But he said this third one, and what's interesting, I talked to Troy later. He said he's never shared this third one with any other church, any other person. He said the third requirement is you can't care what happens to your church. Mm-hmm. And that was providential, because I was on a journey where I have just recently gone through an awful lot of pain and disillusionment with our church. And I'm a shepherd. If you cut me, I bleed shepherd, and I'm loyalist, and I was severely hurt. I won't get into it, but severely hurt by people I'd known for 25 years, a lot of people. Mm-hmm. So I was done, and in a good sense. And so when Troy said that, I immediately said, I don't care. 2 years prior, I would have cared. So God had prepared my heart and the heart of my team for that moment. Mm-hmm. And so Troy said, okay, here's what you do. We're actually doing our first training in Pasadena down the freeway. And so he invited us. So a month and a half later, we showed up at this Gospel Conversations training and went through the training, learned the 4 fields, learned the 411, went out into the harvest, and God just spoke to each one of us. At that point, went from 8, we brought another 5, so there were 13 of us. And what was interesting is that night, for some reason, Troy invited me to a kind of a debrief with leadership. And I didn't know why, but I went. And my wife couldn't come. And I came back from that. And my wife said, how did that go? And I said, I found my tribe. Mm. It was so powerful. I said, I found the people that I didn't know I was looking for. And I was a pastor for most of my life, but I'd never found people that had a heart like these people had, at least in America. So what we did, we said, we're gonna do this. And even driving back from Texas, we were praying, and we started fasting and praying, and we started going into the harvest, and we were praying for lostness, and we were going in door to door in Long Beach and North Orange County, sharing the gospel. We did that for a while. Rick Prioto was coaching us, and he on the Zoom call, he would call us, and we say, well, we're doing this. He said, oh, you haven't done this. And I really, anybody who's involved in movement, I highly recommend just finding really good coaches. This just continues to be life-giving to me. And Rick was just great at that. And one thing we weren't doing is we weren't meeting as church. We were going into the harvest, and we were praying for lostness, but we weren't meeting as church, what we call simple church. That's the phrase we use. 3/3, some people use that phrase. And so we said, okay, so we planted one in my living room, and that's been 2.5 years ago, 2 years ago, 2 years and a month ago. So we planted one in my living room. And in that meantime, I took about a month off to just focus my mind. And I went to Haiti to learn from Jacob Vai, see what was happening down there. Spent some time with Curtis Sargent. Yeah. I've always respected his writings. And then we planted that church in my home. I planted a church with Curtis phrases as a leadership pod. He said there's 2 kinds. There's churches out of the harvest that you can plant, and then there's churches of leaders that you believe are already equipped to go ahead and plant one in their own sphere of influence. So I went with the leadership pod because we hadn't had any new disciples out of the harvest yet. So now 2 years later, we have 5 streams coming directly out of that church. So we planted 5 different churches and then one other that planted out of that, just out of that church. And we still meet, and now we have people from the harvest meeting with us in that church as well. And so we have, I guess that would be 3rd generation, depending if and so in the meantime, that's been given us, we've approached our church, our larger church, Bridges. And I went back to my elders and I said, look, I'm going to do this. I want to do this. We're elder-driven church. I submit to you guys. I want to do this, but I want to do it here, but I'm going to do this. And they said, we need to do this. So as a church, we embraced this vision of No Place Left. We embraced whatever that takes. And we've learned a lot along the way on how to bring some people along at a different pace than others. We're still learning that.
What have you learned, JT, about?
Well, I learned that it's not wise to compare ministries. And I've always had a fairly healthy heart for the bride, so I don't think we ever bashed what people did. But when I get enthusiastic about movement and I come back to a community and say, this is, if I said erroneously at times, this is where we really need to do, and this is kind of insinuate this is really ministry, what I'm telling those people is, well, what you're doing isn't, or what you're doing isn't as significant. And I've just learned through the years, for 2 years now, that some people just need to embrace change differently and slowly, but it's still what they're doing. If it's of the Lord and they're proclaiming truth, it's the bride of Christ. And so some just ran with us right away. Some I call the second wave. We're kind of in that second wave now. Most of the rest of the church are now saying, yeah, they're not, this isn't going away. They're going to continue to do this. But now the difference, Steve, is we have work to point to. We can point to 8 churches that God's planted. So in 20 years of existence at Bridges, we've sent out just a handful of pastors to start their own churches. In 2 years, we planted 8 churches with no budget. And it's impacting the culture all around us. And they've already reached another generation past. And so we can point to the work, whereas before it was just theory initially. No one had anything to look to. So we learned that. Point to the work and point to the scriptures. And those are some of the things we learned to make sure that some people run at a slower pace. Some people want to sprint with this. Mm-hmm. And so to help with that difference, we started a residency in January. A residency is just letting the people that want to run, giving them a rhythm to run with. And so each residency has 2 hours. They commit to 2 hours in the harvest a week, 2 hours in a 3/3 simple church model a week, and then 2 hours training a week. And we have a leadership that we have curriculum we study as well, mostly the scriptures. And actually, we read your book, was one of the books. And so we're almost finishing up that year of residency. And what that's done is given people a path to run with that want to run, but it doesn't leave everyone else behind and say, this isn't the only thing we're doing as a church community. So those are some things we've learned and really helped. We're looking forward to starting in our second year of residency because we learned a lot there too, and how to do that better next year. But the cool thing, Steve, is out of that residency, with nobody in January was planning on going. The purpose of the residency is to train church planters and then to train them up and be practitioners here so that hopefully that God might send them either to the nations or to their neighbors. But we want to train church planters. But we've already sent an individual to Mexico full-time. We have 2 more that are raising support to go full-time into the nations as well. And that came directly out of that residency. And so it was very exciting to see what's happened. So that's what we're working on now, that second year of residency, and just trying to come alongside those church planters that have planted these other churches and these other streams and learn from each other. And we continue to get a lot of coaching. Really, the Coopers have moved out here. Mike Puckett and Kelly have moved out here. The Priados have moved out here. And they've been coaches, but they haven't run the team. They've kind of made sure that our locals run the team. And I think that's been very wise and strategic and helpful to us. They're dear friends and we do a lot with them, but they made sure that they weren't kind of taking over what we're doing. They let us learn the hard lessons as we go. Yeah.
You said learn some important lessons from the year 1 residency. Mm-hmm. Year 2 will be different. So what are some of those lessons?
What we learned was unless you meet on a regular basis with everyone who signed up for the residency, it's difficult to keep people on board. So we had a lot more people sign up than could meet with us regularly. And the people who didn't meet with us regularly really kind of felt as outsiders. So we need to remedy that. Another thing we learned is we didn't really keep track of the reading and talk about that. We just kind of assigned it. And so we're like, there has to be discussion to keep people engaged in some of the reading, especially the long chunks of scripture. What else? We just talked about that this morning, so it's fresh in my mind. I think we learned that some people do better being held accountable to commitment, and some people will tend to think that that's heads towards legalism. So finding a balance and temperament and background. Some people had different religious backgrounds there, where holding someone accountable sounds legalistic. For some people, they're like, if you don't hold me accountable, I struggle. And so just really figuring that out. What does that look like? One thing we learned this year is everybody in the residency has a role on the Long Beach team, and that's been extremely helpful. So we have someone who keeps track, and they're the tracker, so they keep track of all the commitments, and they map it out. So there are mappers. We have another person who's the communicator, another person who's the recruiter, another person is just connecting churches in Long Beach that are interested in movement. Another person, this guy's gold. His job is to help the people from Bridges continue to give them on-ramps into movement. And he's taken those ones who aren't in the residency and helping them come, find ways into movement. So everyone has a role. And that's when we really started to accelerate. So that was a big lesson to learn as well. Yeah.
What was the intake in year one?
The intake in...
A number of people in the residency.
Oh, okay. We started with 16 people. Yes.
And how about, what are you expecting for year two?
My guess is we'll probably have close to that number. Some will not do it a second year, but I think we have some others that want to jump in. So I think it'll be pretty close, is my guess. I'm on a quest. I call them pastors of peace. And I think we have a window between when a pastor feels something's disgruntled, but he's not discouraged. And that's the kind of the sweet spot. And so those seem to be the ones who are the most receptive, that are willing to listen to just a different approach. And I'm very careful to say this isn't the only approach, but we really believe it's much closer to the biblical model. And it's a way to reach statistically, it is the way to reach Long Beach. Much more so. But yeah, so I'm looking for people that want some training and some help, and but aren't so discouraged that they're disgruntled with the church. And honestly, Steve, a lot of my peers, and I've been doing this a long time. I've been just a local pastor for a long time. A lot of my peers, they're not in the ministry. They're selling insurance, or they're good people, and some of them have actually struggled. But there's something about the model and the pressure on a pastor in America that I think it's impossible to fulfill. And what I found with movement, it's not personality driven at all. It's Christ driven. It's focused on the body of Christ. And if I'm not able to make it, it doesn't matter. It doesn't really matter. Church still happens. And in the movement model, in the simple church model. And that's just very refreshing. And I think it's much more sustaining for leadership, at least so far. What we're praying about is, what does it look for sustainable churches? And that's kind of the new lesson we're really searching into, because we've only been at it 2 years, and we've had 2 churches that didn't continue. And we track that too. What happened there? Why was that? Yeah.
So what's God put on your heart now for your patch there in Southern California?
Yeah, on my heart is that I'm praying that we'll be able to multiply residencies, and we'll be able to connect. And we've seen that in Southern California. I think we have 5. Well, just in Los Angeles, we have. We went from in California, went from 5 to 45 in the last 2 years. So there are teams, and we're networking with them. We're trying to figure out our rhythm there. But I guess my passion is to continue to connect with like-minded people, to learn from them, and to see residencies multiply in each city our passion, we wake up every morning and our passion is there's 1.4 million people in Long Beach and North Orange County that are far from God. So that's our God-sized vision. We want them, each one of them, to hear the gospel from our mouth to their ear. So that's what we get up for every morning. We can't do that with the churches we have now. It has to multiply. It has to push downstream. And we have to, and I think I have a passion for pastors of what people call legacy churches to really have a heart to say, wait a minute, if we don't multiply, we're never going to reach this culture. And so I'm looking for that, for people like that I can come alongside and work with, teach, but work with. And I think the resources are there. Yeah.
So what would you encourage them in? Those pastors of existing churches that they want to see multiplication come out of the life of their church, but they don't want to blow their church up either.
The first thing to do is be a practitioner. Be someone who goes into the harvest regularly, that has a rhythm. Start a church in your home. I think if you did those two things and brought people along with you, that's the first step. And as they start to look at the work, then as you invite people into the work and coach them, I would say get good coaching. The coaching is available. They're out there. There are people that will come alongside. So don't settle. If you can't find it, keep asking, because it's out there. And then I would say spend time with people of like-mindedness, because it's lonely. You'll get discouraged. And try not to use words or phrases like this is the right way, because that's comparison. Or this is the only way, or we finally found the biblical way to do ministry. I call that bride bashing, and it's subtle, but it's not right. And so even if your intentions are right, you can harm somebody if you're not careful, and really discredit faithful ministry over the year. You know what's been really helpful for me is what we call the Great Commission pipeline. And if someone could get a hold of that, I'm sure you could look it up. But when I saw the diagram of the Great Commission pipeline, I said, why can't a legacy church be that hub, a movement hub? When I gave our church the vision of saying, you know what, we are a movement hub. And our little church, we don't have large numbers. We have a movement. We have a hub right here. And God's allowed us to plant 8 churches now in less than 2 years. And we already have a field hub in Ethiopia. We're starting one in Mexico City. We have one in Mozambique. We have these field hubs, and we see movement there. We've seen thousands of churches planted through where we have a part in that, and helping people see that, wow, there is a strong need and purpose for this legacy church. Because if that goes away, you're not going to have these hubs going out there. And when people saw that bigger vision and where they fit, it gave worth to the person that sets up the chairs on Sundays, and gave worth to the person that says, I want to lead our community in worship. And I think that I personally believe, Steve, that a combination is the answer to a lot of how we're going to reach America. And there's some great churches out there that don't do house movement, and there's some great house churches that don't do a larger gathering. But I felt like, man, if we could do both in a healthy way without compromising vision, I really think it's possible. And so I would encourage anybody in a legacy situation to seek out coaching and try to find a way. And we have Zoom calls of people that we're working this out on a regular basis, different pastors all over the country, and we're talking about how do we make this happen. And it's happening. And there's a lot of people farther ahead than we are that I learn a lot from. Brian King's one of them, for sure.
So, Brian, you've been on this journey. How have you changed over the course of it?
That's a great question. I think I've changed because I've seen new disciples have a place right away. Quick story. There's a gentleman named Larry. I own a business. He's a client, and he was in crisis, and I shared the gospel with him, and he ends up start to follow Jesus. And he starts coming to our church on Thursday nights in my home. And he said, about 2 weeks into it, he says, second time, he goes, what's harvest? What's that mean? And we explained to him, we have terminology, and we explained it to him. Well, that was a month and a half ago. Last week, you know what his goals were? I need to sow more in the harvest. So I just see this gentleman. In fact, I'm meeting him this evening to go through another command of Christ. And his wife says, she thinks he joined a cult. And so when he was telling me this, I started being apologetic, and he goes, no, I'm not worried about her. I want you to teach me how to lead her to Jesus. I don't care what she thinks about. This is real. And I say, man, I'm giving my life to this. This is what I'm giving my life to. And because Larry said, he goes, I could go to a church, and he says, but you know what, JT? I went to 13 schools in 12 years of my life. I've never known my father, and I've always been insecure. He says, I can go to a larger gathering. He says, but I'm nervous there. He says, but in your living room, I feel safe. And I think he feels safe not because we're great people. He feels safe because the love of Christ, he has to interact with us. He has to interact with the scriptures, because you can't just sit, listen, and leave. And so I've changed because I feel like now when I make disciples, I have a place to immediately put them. I really believe the call is to make disciples, and churches are a place for those disciples. And when I see it that way, church planning has a face, and it has a name, and it's Larry, and it's Joe, and it's Rachel, and it's these people. And it's not an institution. And you know what we're doing with them? We're teaching them to be church planters. We're not teaching them just to be a part of the church. They are the church. And so I've changed that way. I've changed because I found my tribe. I really have. It's very life-giving. And the coolest thing is, one quick story. My son said this sums it up really well. So my son has gone to Ethiopia with most of his life. And so right around February, we start to train for a large trip in the summer that he would go on. And as we were training this 2 years, like the 1 year into the movement, he said, you know what, Dad? Usually right around this time, spiritual warfare starts really cranking up, and we see just a lot of resistance because we're getting ready for this trip. He goes, you know what now, Dad? It's all the time. There's always spiritual warfare. I'm like, you've nailed it, Colson. Exactly. There's spiritual warfare because we're engaged in the harvest all the time. And that's how it's transforming my family. It's how it's transforming our church. And that's something that's very good.
Visit movements.net and follow the links to some of the resources that Jeff refers to. This has been episode 205 of the Movements Podcast, and I'm Steve Addison.